Hi, buddy. Welcome back. I'm the Stretch Professor, and today we're going to be doing the tier list for support for patch 1320. So, as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Check out the rest of the content as well. I did do a patch preview for what I think is going to be going on in this patch. I'll catch up to speed just really quickly at the beginning of this video. And I'm going to try to do some tier lists for other roles as well as this patch progresses. And then you can come by, check out the stream. It's most nights starting sometime between 11 and 12, usually around 11:30, 12 o'clock. Play 2 or 3 games. So it's always fun if you guys can come out, hang out, have some good conversations while I'm out there playing. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. So I will say that this is probably the most difficult patch to predict, or certainly one of them for the whole season, because there are a lot of big system-wide changes, at least that they're talking about. So we'll see how much it actually changes. But the couple of things to keep in mind is that they are wanting to nerf the jungle. That's what it seems like to me, or change it to where there's a much higher opportunity cost for ganking all the time. And ultimately, I think that is a good thing for the game. I think jungle should be all about choices, and you should be rewarded for making good choices, but you should also be punished for making bad choices. So over ganking, for example. But ever since they did kind of the rubber banding with experience and all the catch-up mechanics, it has heavily benefited people who sort of dropped their farm and just kept ganking over and over and over again. And then if they fell behind in levels or they fell behind in gold or whatever from doing that, then their camps would be worth more when they come back in. So they did nerf rubber banding a while ago, but I still think that, I don't know, it still just seems like it has heavily favored just super ganking a lot early on. So they're trying to change that. They're trying to make it take longer to clear the jungle in general. So if you try to gank, it's more likely that you're going to be missing camps. You're not going to have those windows of opportunity where you've cleared most of the jungle and you can just sit there and gank. So, I mean, there's a number of ways they could have done that, but they chose to do it by increasing the durability of the monsters rather than nerfing the damage that the jungle item does to camps, or the pet does to camps, or whatever, or making the camp spawn faster to keep people in the jungle and be worth less. These are all things they've done in the past, but it looks like they're increasing jungle monster durability by quite a bit, because one of their goals also is to reduce the amount of camps that are poached. So they really don't want mid laners and ADCs, top laners to be taking the camps a lot of times. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about this, but there's at higher levels of play, I have heard some streamers, so not pro, but during high level solo queue, people just complaining that the laners just get to go in there and just take all their camps at a certain point. Right, so junglers are really impactful early, but a lot of times they're seen to fall off, or at least go into more of a supportive role later, because it's optimal to give your mid laner or your ADC your jungle camps. Well, now it's going to change that a little bit to where it might be more optimal for the jungler just to keep clearing them. So that's going to make junglers that scale really well with gold, really well with items, probably be better overall picks in a meta. So stuff like Graves, possibly something like Karthus at high levels, maybe Master Yi at kind of lower to mid levels. I mean, Graves is probably one of the biggest hard farm scalers. I guess something like Kindred. I don't know, maybe you could say Diana, Lilia, things like that as well. But what this is going to do, though, is mean that there's less pressure on lanes earlier, hopefully. That's what it seems like it's going to be talking about. So that means that supports that ultimately just want to have longer in lane, not have the lanes broken as fast, and just want to be able to put on pressure without as much threat of being ganked. So immobile supports that scale well, a lot of enchanters, I think, are going to be better in this type of meta. Usually that's what happens when it slows down. Although I will say, the way that they're slowing it down here by basically encouraging junglers to scale more by staying in the jungle longer and by continuing to farm throughout the whole game. That might mean if we do see things like Graves, like Kindred, like Diana, or some of these other high scaling junglers, you might need a support that has Engage or CC, right? Because I don't know, maybe stuff like Sejuani still will be good in that environment. But if everyone's on that Graves, then you might need to have some CC as the support, or your team comp just may not work. Especially in solo queue, people really don't like to play, tanks, especially if they're not super meta. So just team comp wise, this might mean that it's more likely you're not going to have any Engage on your team if you don't go Engage a support, which is not going to favor most enchanters, but we'll see. I still think it's going to be very Enchanter positive. The intent is for junglers to spend a bit more time farming, but not so much they feel trapped in the jungle. Okay, we're also buffing non-jungler starting items. Okay, so they're making the starting items better. So that's going to be good against not only jungle ganks, but just all-ins in general. Early on, it's more likely people are going to be able to survive that. So again, this is going to favor enchanters. If you can't get those kills, if the jungler items have a bit more like HP on them, that's going to help. And they're doing a lot of anti-snowball mechanics. So in particular, they're nerfing the heck out of dragons and void monsters. So that means that, it's okay if you have kind of a little bit of a weaker lane and you just give up some dragons, as long as your jungler's keeping up with their farm and your laners are keeping up with farm. It's okay if you sacrifice dragons, or if you sacrifice Rift Herald a little bit more, because Rift Herald gives less local gold, and it's gonna plates are worth less money as well. So again, this means that those early pressure types of supports that really want to dominate a lane, stuff like Lux, Zyra, Xerath, kind of your ranged poke lane kingdom champs, are not going to be as effective. Like, yes, you're going to go down a little bit, but if you're able to pressure and get plates or get dragons, it's not going to benefit you as much. So you might just get outscaled by enchanters at that point. And engage champs, it's similar if it's a hardcore early game engage with like less CC, I think. So something maybe like Alistar is going to be hurt a little bit by that. And not things like Nautilus, it's going to be harder to secure kills early on, but you do still have a lot of CC later if you're a Nautilus, if you're a Leona, that type of thing. So we'll see how that pans out. It might make something like Braum a little bit better, like into those types of champs, because Braum, I mean, like, he is good early, but really he shines later on in these 5v5 team fights. So we'll see. I think it makes AP supports probably worse, that you get a little bit less reward for plates and dragons in the early game. Although you are in less risk of getting ganked, right? If you are something like a Zyra or a Brand. So you can pressure more in lane. It's just the rewards are not going to be as heavy. So the biggest beneficiaries are going to be things that aren't as strong in the laning phase and that want to be able to scale up, right? That can be vulnerable to ganks, but aren't necessarily super strong in lane. Now they're going to have more time to get to that second or maybe third item and really start dominating that late game, which, again, is typically most enchanters. Okay. So that's pretty much it from, like, a huge macro level. There are a couple of individual changes. Samilio looks like is getting a little bit better. His shield is going up quite a bit. Remember, you can double shield this. That's going to be 360 instead of 320. Potentially on the double shield, you get your charges back a little bit faster. Kimtech Putrefier works better because the burn now counts. That item's like okay. I think it's kind of weak on a bunch of enchanters, but maybe it's going to be a lot better on him now. And then your R healing is the AP ratio's up a little bit. So typically you're not buying a ton of AP on him, but it's there for a little bit of help. Okay, and then you've got your Morgana. They're buffing Ziggs up a little bit. People have been playing in bot lane. I think that these macro changes to the jungle and to tower plates and dragons don't favor Ziggs. Because I think Ziggs, where he's at his strongest, and I don't think he's that great overall as an ADC. There are some picks where, like some compositions where he's okay, but his best spots are where you get to hard pressure, take plates early, and then you've got your abilities, including your ultimate, that do a lot of damage early on off of one item in like a team fight around Dragon, for example. So that's how a lot of these most mages are, is they're really strong early in the game off of like one or two items in team fights. They have big AoE spells that do damage. Versus something like Caitlyn can also pressure towers, but she's not going to be as effective off of like one item for that first dragon fight, maybe that second dragon fight, but she's going to be a lot stronger down the line just because of how the stats scale on AD carry versus mages a lot of times. So this is a buff to Ziggs, but I think the meta shift overall is going to hurt Ziggs a little bit. Now Jinx could be a big player here. 25% bonus attack speed on kill now stacks. Okay, so someone mentioned in the comments that I had thought that Jinx, I was thinking of her Q warming up as you auto attack people, but I thought that you got something off of killing smaller people. You got like a little bonus off of that. I was confused with another champion, I guess. So anyways, this only happens when you kill champs or towers or epic monsters. So overall, this looks pretty good. She has more opportunities to shoot her rockets and get a free kill or two, a little bit more HP, a little bit more damage on the rockets. So she's okay. It's just that she's a lot better when she has an Enchanter with her where she's not getting ganked 24/7. So I think the meta is going to be very friendly towards her. Other stuff. People are making fun of me for the Cassante thing too, a little bit in the comments. It's like, dude, they're like big brain analysis, you know, good analysis of these 50 changes. It's like, I don't think anyone's hardly going to be able to do an analysis of these that's reasonable, right? Unless they do maybe an entire video. Apparently Freak has a video about it. If I had to guess, I'd say it's a nerf because I think he's on the strong side right now. But it's so many variables. Like, it's so many. And it's not even like super consistent, I don't think, with what they're doing. So like, here is more armor, but this is less health. You know, the Q damage is less baseline, and your flash is enabled on it, but now it resets on your R. So, you know, you got to think through, okay, what are all the different scenarios where you're going to be R'ing and then Qing immediately right after that, or are you going to be using your third Q into your R? I'm also not a top lane main and not a Cassante main, and he's already, like, super loaded with stuff, right? But just stuff like the W minimum channel is 0.65, but the max channel is unchanged, and it always behaves as though it's a max channel. Like, how the hell do you even know what that means unless you actually play Cassante a lot and you know the feel of that? Because a lot of these are like feel sort of changes. Like, on paper, you just don't get a sense of what it is until you play with it. It's kind of like when they changed Thresh's like flay animation a little bit a while back. It didn't look like a lot. It's like 0.1 extra seconds for the flay to go off, but it was a really big deal for that animation, and significantly hurt Thresh for a while there. So there's just, like, when you start messing with animations and timings and how your abilities interact with each other, it's just really hard to predict, especially if you're not, like, you know, playing that champion a lot, exactly what's going to happen. So instead of just making up a bunch of garbage and just saying, oh yeah, I think this is, like, I'm just being honest with you guys, like, these are so many changes, and so many of them are, like I said, sort of behavioral changes, not just a couple of numbers here and there, and it's not even consistent. It's not like all survivability is going down and all damage is going up, or all damage is going up and survivability is going down. It's sort of all over the place. Right? It's like mana cost, which really is only going to matter early game for how often you're trading, and then the stun duration is, you know, going to be a little bit more here. So again, if I had to like guess, I would say they probably want him to like do less damage. Like, this looks like a little bit less damage. But again, some abilities are getting more damage, some abilities are getting less damage. It's just almost impossible to call it unless you play him a lot, where you can make these things up. Either way, I just feel like this is too many changes at once. Like, do a couple of these. I just don't think there's any universe where you're like, you know what, we have to make 50 changes on this patch to Cassante. It's like, turn a couple of knobs at a time, man. Like, take these 5 lines or something, start with that, and then just see if you need to do the next ones. I know that some of these are, like, obviously interrelated to other ones, so you're taking damage away from one thing and you're moving damage over to another thing to encourage a certain sequencing of his abilities or to help him in certain matchups or hurt him in other matchups. I don't know. But anyways, I'm not going to get into all that again, so sorry I can't give you the perfect analysis on that, but I think I would have to either be a pro player that's played like 300 reps on this guy or like a challenger that one tricks him to really have a good predictive like analysis of exactly what this is going to mean for him in the overall meta and some of the popular matchups like Renekton that he is typically played into. Okay. And then there's those changes. So as far as the early starting items, they're giving 20 extra HP and a little bit extra AD. The HP is going to help a lot, I think, with the survivability. That's every AD carry is basically getting 20 HP early on. And then the supports are getting a little bit more HP, like 5. But the ADCs not being able, where you can't blow up the ADCs as easily at like level 2 and 3, is going to hurt quite a bit of all enchants and is going to help enchanters. Okay, let's go ahead and get back in here. Now that we just sort of rehashed the patch notes again for 15 minutes or so, let's talk about the actual support tier list. And I've got maybe 15 or so minutes left. Okay, well, Rakan is still going to be up there, I think. Surprise, surprise. But I think that he's just versatile, so I'm not really sure where the meta's going, but, you know, he can thrive in almost any meta. Again, I think it's going towards enchanters. If I had to guess, this might be a patch where Rakan goes down a little bit. I could see him slip into tier 2 potentially, but again, it's just kind of difficult to predict. So he doesn't scale as hard as something like a Sona or a Yuumi or a Soraka, but he does have engage. So again, if it's a lot of Graves, stuff like that in the jungle, and then top lane are, you know, more scaling champions, your kind of Fiora, Camille, Tryndamere, that type of stuff in the top lane that doesn't have CC, then like Rakan's going to be a good option because he can do the enchanter stuff. He's better at playing the longer game. He doesn't have a phenomenal laning phase. It's okay. Like, you can make kills, you can make plays. It's going to be a lot harder now, but that's fine. You can still scale into the mid and late game pretty well. So he can do things like Radiant Virtue into Redemption, which is already pretty popular for quite a bit of healing. So he's just a good, safe, all-around pick. Anyone who's watched the channel knows that I'm kind of a Rakan one-trick at this point. Occasionally I play other things, but he's just very versatile. So I think it's hard to like imagine a world where Rakan's not tier 1 or tier 2 unless they mess with his animations. Remember, I was just talking about animations. The worst thing that ever happened to Rakan was where they slowed down his W, the movement speed on his W. And they even gave him extra damage on like his W and I think maybe his shields. They changed stuff to try to compensate it, but it was the fact that his W moved super slow, made it way too easy to dodge, and that change alone kind of put Rakan in the dumpster for like a few months before they reverted it and changed it back. So, and when Rakan was at his strongest, it was when that W moved super fast and you could ult and then R immediately, right? So before they put that half a second delay on the R, it's a big deal. So again, kind of going back to the Cassante, some of this stuff like R resetting the Q cooldown and Flash being disabled and crap like that, that could be a very, very big deal for some champions, right? That can completely make or break champions based on just 1 or 2 changes like that. So again, that makes it hard to predict. A lot of people didn't think that Rakan was going to be that bad off of the W changes, myself included, but he was god-awful after that. It was really bad. So, anyways, Rakan, your standard jack-of-all-trades, good engage, some of the best engage in the game, I would argue, because you can kind of go through stuff. As long as you dodge the CC, it's really hard to peel Rakan. Good sort of survivability around ganks. You're probably not going to get ganked as much, but it still could happen. Good vision control, good roaming. I mean, he's just above average at pretty much everything, I think. So he's almost always a good safe pick. And then you got Blitzcrank, which might seem a little odd because I was just talking about all of the enchanters and kind of the early game all-in-champs not being as good. But Blitzcrank, I think, is a little bit of an exception because he still has a ton of damage early on. Really one of the best single target engages in the game because it completely pulls them out of position and you don't risk yourself going in. Right? So like with Leona, you're going all the way in. With Nautilus, you're going halfway. Nautilus also can't throw it through walls, so that kind of hurts your pick potential sometimes. But Blitzcrank's hook, goes through walls. It has a massive hitbox, massive range, really fast animation, and just has a really high baseline damage. I think a fully charged hook is like 300 damage or something. It's a lot. And then you have the ultimate. So he actually is 305. So you have the ability to actually get through a lot of this stuff and blow people up. Now, this extra HP on the ADCs and potentially on some supports, maybe that, matters if he's not able to convert. But he's one of the supports that I still think will be able to convert if he lands those hooks. And it's very good against squishies, right? Because obviously squishies are going to have low HP, but a lot of times their protection is going to be shields, and his R breaks the shield and then does its damage. So, and likewise, if you pull somebody in, you pull their AD carry, a lot of what people are going to be doing to try to protect them is put a big shield on them with Melio, Janna, Lulu, whatever, and your R is going to break that. So, I still think that he's going to be very good if the enemy is picking enchanters and immobile ADCs, right? If they're picking the Jinxes, they're Kog'Maws, stuff like that. They're trying to scale up. Then Blitzcrank's going to be good in that environment. Now, obviously, he's very hit or miss, right? You have one ability that really matters at the end of the day, and that's your hook. So if you hit the hooks consistently, or you can pressure them off of the wave, where they're going to have to sacrifice a lot of CS to try to hide from the hooks, then he can be very strong. But if you're missing hooks, there's a huge window of vulnerability there. And in later in the game, if they do have a lot of tanks, then the hook could be bad. Now, if they're playing more, again, squishy carry stuff in the jungle, so not Sejuani, but they're playing, the Dianas, Kindreds, stuff like that, then that hook's still going to be really valuable later on in the game. So it's excellent for pressuring around like Barons and, other late game objectives. That's just like one of the most devastating things that can happen to you is all the lights are out and now you've got to try to get vision on Barons. They're probably doing it. And then you see that hook come over the wall, it's over. So I still think Blitzcrank for solo queue. I don't think you'll see him as much in pro or like really high level play, but I think that this is a type of meta where you might see the tanks go away in favor of scaling types of champions. He's historically pretty good into those. Next, I have Sona. So I think she's probably for solo queue, most levels of play. Again, it's going to get a little different when you start getting into like high diamond masters. But most levels of play, she's going to be one of the better scaling champs from the support role in the game. She already has this pretty high win rate of 53 in a gank-heavy meta. So when that comes down a little bit, obviously she's going to be a lot better. So you get stacks of her passive that gives you extra ability haste, lowers the cooldown on your ult. She does have an ability that does layer really well in team fights. It can start a fight technically. The range and the hitbox are a little questionable. But you can actually start fights with that if you see opportunities. She doesn't have a lot of CC outside of that. You can get a slow off of the E, which is cool. It's a non-decaying slow over 2 seconds. So you do sort of have that. You can speed up your team so that they can potentially run down people a little bit better. You do have the utility of that W doing, like, lowering the damage. So if you exhaust somebody and put a green power cord on them, it basically just stuffs a lot of engaged champs really well. And then with Moonstone and then getting into Archangels, again, you're trying to scale with these items, the Archangels, you've got your tier, of course, stacking up, and then this is better over time as you get more items, as you level up, get more HP. It's going to become more powerful. And then Moonstone also going to be better as you start getting more points into your W. Your heal goes up. And if you get some other plus healing and shielding items, obviously, that's going to be good as well. So, and I think Helia is also a good item if you want something that's a little bit stronger earlier. And Shirelia's if you just want more utility. Can be good. So she has several options. She's obviously vulnerable to ganks, but if those aren't coming in as much early, then she's an excellent team fighter later on. Not as good if it's like a split push kind of thing and people aren't like a split pick type of comp and people aren't grouping up for 5v5s, but I think in solo queue a lot of times you can force people to group up to like defend Baron or force them to defend their base, that type of thing. So I think she's going to be pretty good there. Okay. Last little bit here. We've got Melio. I just talked about some of his changes. I still think he'll be pretty good, especially if you want like a little bit of pressure early. That W is still really, really good for trades and your shield. And then you've got your Q to help stuff in gauges. Potentially add a little bit of harassment in there. A little bit of wave clear, not a lot. But they did give the Q, I think, didn't they give it a pretty big either base damage buff or like huge AP ratio? They buffed it quite a bit a while back. Now he has a really low win rate right now, so maybe he's a lot worse than I think, but I remember seeing him in a couple of games over the last few patches, and he was okay. So Melio is someone who could show up, especially if you have like an early pressure laner like a Caitlyn, something with long range like a Jinx that's going to be able to leverage that W range and get some good harassment in. Then we've got Yuumi, everybody's favorite. Now, Yuumi did get nerfed quite a bit, maybe 5 or 6 patches ago. But anytime the meta's slowing down, people have more time to get items. She's really, really good. Great AoE capabilities. You've still got that root. You've still got the healing that she puts out. I think she still has the root. Maybe they changed it to just a slow. But I think it's still a root. I haven't seen her in forever. But yeah, I mean, obviously scales really well. The major advantage of Yuumi is it's really hard to pick her off in the late game because she's just going to attach to somebody. And that's sort of what sets her apart and why she's played in pro when enchanters are at all viable. Usually Yumi's in that conversation because you can't pick her off. And that's usually the major way you kind of deal with enchanters late game is you kill them, but you can't kill Yuumi. So I would not be surprised to see Yuumi making a comeback, especially in higher level play. In lower level play, people will mess up, or they won't, like, their team won't help them out as much, especially with like vision. So if Yumi's like going off trying to ward by herself, she can get picked off and killed easily there, and you don't have that kind of coordination and game sense in lower elos a lot of times. So although Yuumi seems like she's sort of just a mindless, like, low elo champ, it's like she can be, but she's even better at higher elo because they're really going to leverage that consistency. They're going to help her ward. They're going to group up and actually have team fights with her. So they're going to coordinate, ultimates and all that kind of stuff. So I think Yuumi, there's a chance she could come back in. Although again, her numbers have been hit pretty hard and her win rate is pretty low. But the meta does favor, I think, next patch something like a Yuumi. Lulu's another one that's kind of like Yuumi light in a sense. She does buff up attack speed and movement speed quite a bit, especially that attack speed, and she gives the on-hit damage with picks whenever she puts her E on somebody. So that can be really useful if we start seeing Jinx, we start seeing Kog'Maw, if we start seeing Zeri potentially come back into the meta, and I don't know if their champs are coming back, but if they do, Lulu, again, usually picked a lot, usually really powerful. So these are kind of like the 4 main enchanters I would expect to become meta in higher elo. Well, these 3 in higher elo, Sona and lower, but the rest can also succeed down there. And you've also got like still good, but a little bit more of a solo queue special. You've got Seraphine and Soraka. Soraka's obviously the queen of heals, but kind of light on CC. She does favor if you have tanks more on your team because they get more effective health out of those heals. If you're healing a Master Yi, that's cool, but if you're healing a Sejuani with 150 armor or something like that, then that's, you're going to get a lot more mileage out of that heal. She does help a little bit with global pressure, so if you have if your team wants to weak side you bot lane and they just want to keep trying to dive top lane or mid over and over again, you can help with that with your R. So she does have some good utility. She's just really vulnerable and doesn't bring a lot to the table as far as CC. Probably the least amount of CC. That silence is good in certain situations. If someone is just coming in off a teleport, or they Zhonya's, or you're trying to interrupt something, like the silence can be good, but I just think in a lot of situations it's not going to be as good as hard CC. You've got Seraphine, who can pressure early, which is nice, add a little bit of damage. I think her healing and shielding is somewhat limited later on. It's a big burst of shield with a huge radius, unlike Sona, but it's a much, much longer cooldown, and she doesn't really do a lot to empower her allies. She gets extra damage on her autos, but her real thing that she can do is the chain CC. Can be really good, especially if she gets Rylai's. I don't know if that's still her build or not after all the changes, but your R into your W for the chain CC is something like 3 or 4 seconds of root/stun, and that has a really huge range. So that's kind of her big claim to fame, is lots and lots of CC, really good engage potential off of her, but less overall scaling with the healing and shielding. But she potentially could make a comeback. Janna, I know we were talking about her on stream a little bit last night. Very good at peeling, very bad at starting fights. So her shield is a pretty long cooldown early on. There are ways you can... it gets better later as you start chaining your CC with your your Q and your R and stuff like that. It lowers the cooldown on the shield. So you get a little bit of value later. But the main thing with Janna is, like, your ADC has to be good, or some AD champion on your team has to be good to, like, really maximize her value, because her shield gives bonus AD, but also if the shield breaks, then you lose the AD. Versus Lulu, when you put your picks on them, then they get that on-hit damage the entire time, even if picks goes away. And just the fact that Lulu gives attack speed, on-hit, and movement speed just feels like it's a lot more buffs than Janna. So it feels like Lulu just has a lot more offensive options, and that polymorph is really good too. It's just a point-click CC. They can still move, but it's really good at disabling a lot of divers. So I'd probably rather just have Lulu in most situations, but Janna can be still good if you trust your ADC, if you're duoed or they're really good. And it's one of those hyper scaling, especially long range champions, your Jinxes, that type of stuff. Then Janna can be good. Nautilus will still be okay, as I mentioned a little bit ago, but I just don't think it's going to be harder to convert kills early on, because people are going to have more HP. It depends, obviously, if you have like Draven or something with him, that's going to help. But if everybody's playing these scaling champs, and you're not getting jungler assistance early, then I think it's going to be harder to convert the kills. Now, he's still one of the better engaged champs, because that point-click R is almost always going to be really useful to get to those backline, to get to those scalers. And if they're immobile, it is going to make it easier to hit your hooks against something like a Jinx rather than something like a Kai'Sa and Ezreal or whatever. But I just think that he does get outscaled in some games by enchanters if you don't close. So the fact that, his single item, power spike, or whatever is not going to be as valuable because the plates don't matter as much, dragons, rifts don't matter as much, and the games are going to be lasting longer, I think, because the anti-snowball mechanics and all these other things. You're going to start seeing these enchanters more frequently get to 3 items. I think that's where he's going to really, really start to have a problem in a lot of team fights, because you're just not going to be able to kill anybody. He just doesn't really have a lot of damage late game, doesn't have any percentage max health. Everyone's going to have like some magic resist by that point. So it may just be hard to, even if you engage on somebody, to actually convert a kill against something like Emilio or Yuumi, Lulu, all that kind of stuff. And then Senna's a little bit of a wild card. The slower meta probably favors her. It's going to allow her to sit there and just farm souls a lot more, especially against enchanters who don't really have a lot of threat on her early on. They can't really engage on her. She's going to get to farm that up. So it kind of depends on just how good those souls are and how much you need an extra, carry. She does have a little bit of that global presence. She does have some CC, with her W. Where she can make catches, but she does quite a bit of damage. So I think she's probably the best, like, high damage late game scaling support. Like, I'd probably rather have her over a Zyra or a Brand, just because I think she requires less items, because a lot of her damage just comes from those souls stacks. So we'll see. I think if you pair her together with something like a Caitlyn that can pressure early, then she could potentially be pretty good. I don't think you're going to see her in Pro. There's a chance you could see like a Fasting Senna type of thing again, but in solo queue she could be good. And that's pretty much it. I have to call it here. I have some other stuff I have to go do. But the rest of the engaged champs early on, I think they're going to suffer. They still do have the CC later, but because they're not going to be able to get as many conversions in the early game, I think, without the jungle pressure and with the extra HP on the ADC, then I think it's going to make their life a lot harder, and they have the potential to get outscaled. But if these enchanters are out of position and you get a catch on them, you get that thresh hook on the Soraka, mid to late game, you're back in it. So I just think that you have to go out of your way and do something special. Find a really good pick, find a really good engage, or your team comp has to resist getting into 5v5 team fights. You have to be all about split pick, try to put pressure in a side lane and catch people in the jungle while they're rotating to help. That type of thing. You have to get them to break up for these champs to be super effective early on. Especially, I would say Thresh is probably going to suffer the most because he has a hard time getting to the back line later on. He's really all about that early game, causing pressure, and he has utility late game. But at least something like Leona can get to the back line a bit more comfortably. Alistar, so we'll see. Braum is one that could potentially be better in those later game 5v5 team fights, just because you get so many stuns off. They did lower the cooldown on the stun on his passive a while back by like 1 second, I think. So kind of longer fights, he's going to perform a little bit better. And then Tarek's sort of a wild card too. Doesn't apply a lot of pressure early, does scale pretty well later, but historically Tarek has suffered against some of these other champs because he has to stay in combat and keep attacking to get those heals. And that can be sort of dangerous position-wise versus these champs can just stay pretty far back. And many of these champs, like the Yuumi and the Lulu, the Sona, buff up your allies where they're doing more damage or moving faster or whatever, and Tarek just doesn't have that. You do have the ultimate, which is really high impact against hard engaged champs, but he just doesn't buff the... I guess you do give armor out to your one person that you're sort of connected with, but... Anyways, okay, well that's going to be it. I do still think you can win with like Zyra and Brand. It's just going to be harder to close games in my mind. Something like Veigar is a little bit of a wild card because he does scale really well if the game slows down and he doesn't get engaged on, and that stun is very useful. His little circle stun, especially against immobile champs that can't just blink out of it. That stun can be very good. So I don't know, maybe Veigar starts to make a comeback. The items are still a little rough on him. They're still expensive. They don't have great itemization for AP supports, but he's a champ where maybe he doesn't need it as much if he's able to get enough stacks of Phenomenal Evil against some of the enchanters that aren't going to be able to pressure him that hard in the early game. So it would be kind of an interesting off-meta pick if you like to play some sort of weird stuff that could get a little bit better here. Zillion's another one where, that movement speed and the revive is very good if you have a high priority target like a Jinx, like a Master Yi, where you're going to get a lot of value off of that revive. They're going to pop up, and just be ready to start killing again. That could be good. And Bard, I just haven't seen him a lot. Sort of a weird pick. Historically, he's not great in longer games. You want to take over the game early with roams and with ultimates because he just doesn't have any scaling on his abilities. But who knows? Maybe if you get enough chimes, maybe he can make a big difference. But anyways, that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoy it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you do, and I'll see you next time.